problem is that this commissioner is replacing the standards of safety and efficacy with fear and favor. He is doing a political end run around career scientists at the FDA through his commissioner's national priority voucher, through the volatility and decision making around endpoints and notification letters in a way that's undermining patient confidence in the therapies that come to market, and that is undermining the ability of innovators to bring medicines to market with confidence. And I don't say that in a partisan way. I'm on stage right now with an FDA commissioner who was appointed in the first Trump administration, who was a superb FDA commissioner, who came and testified in front of Congress about 20 times in his 2 years. Meanwhile, Commissioner McCary has not showed up once. And the first order of business is for my committee to bring him in front of Congress to testify for his failed stewardship.
I really can't disagree with anything that Jake has said. I mean, he's an FDA commissioner who's regulating by press release, and selling. He seems like he's telling his boss what his boss wants to hear. Meanwhile, the agency is doing exactly the opposite of everything that the press release says. And
when you say his boss, you mean President
Trump. I mean, look, if you look at what Marty McCary is out there talking about and what they're trying to do with his, expedite approvals and bring more drugs through the pipeline and all the other things that the president is vehemently in favor of. If you listen to what Marty's saying, I'm sure Trump thinks things are going great. The problem is that's not what's happening on the ground. What you're seeing is a decimation of the agency. You're seeing people who are in leadership positions over CBER and CDER who are absolutely against everything the president's for, which is just remarkable. I mean, the president fired the one guy once, and I think Commissioner McCary fought to get him back, and with promises that things would change, but things have only gotten worse.
You're talking about Dr.
Prasad, yeah. And so, you just have a situation there where the agency is in a bit of chaos. It's hemorrhaging people. It's not going to be able to keep up with their approvals. You're going to start to see more delays. You're going to start to see more CRLs. It's going to be a bad scene that the president is going to be surprised one day to wake up and see an FDA and see an industry that is migrating offshore and not doing what the president was intended to do. I know he was very proud. I mean, I've had conversations about what the great job that Scott did, and was very much in favor of that type of FDA that was going to be pro-American. We want this industry to be here. He's out here trying to bring companies back to America, and he's driving companies offshore in the biosciences.
Scott, talk specifically about what you think some of the problems are. And by the way, from the inside of the FDA, I assume that you still know a lot of people there and you see what's happening.
Hey, look, I think when you're
and you've been a friend of Marty McCary's for a long time.
Marty and I go back many years. I think when you talk about approval decisions, especially in this context, when you're dealing with rare diseases where data sets are imperfect, you're dealing with small trials, you're dealing with randomization against natural history studies rather than placebo-controlled trials. So, it's sometimes hard to discern a clear benefit in some of these circumstances. It requires a lot of judgment on the part of the review staff. It requires the involvement of senior staff who have a lot of experience looking at these kinds of clinical trial constructs, and senior staff who are going to be willing to make accommodations in certain circumstances, and the willingness to embrace a degree of uncertainty. And I think when you lose some of the folks who have been doing this a long time, as they have, and they're continuing to lose that caliber of personnel, it starts to impact review decisions. And so, part of it could be driven by the orientation of some of the people currently leading these centers, and part of it's just a loss of, a lot of the very senior folks who have in the past intervened in some of these decisions to try to drive them over the finish line. I saw those circumstances come up when I was at the agency, and the people who were always engaged in that kind of adjudication are now gone. If you look at...
Well, they're being overruled, right? I mean, that's part of the reason they're going.
Marty McCary has told me that they have never overruled the staff. The staff that exists to go along those lines.
Well, look, I think...
Rick, what do you...
Well, look, I've had conversations with Marty, and maybe he believes that.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's being told that. but there's a difference between told something by someone in your under your purview and actually getting to the bottom of it and finding out what actually is going on. And there's certainly ample evidence out there in the press that systematically reviewers are being overruled.
Yeah, just to give you sort of one statistic, and I just confirmed this before I came on, the oncology review staff was about 100 people. Mm-hmm. At its peak, it was slightly more than 100. They're down to about 60. 2 just announced their departure in the last month, so they're going to be below 60. That is a palpable loss of qualified reviewers. And I can tell you the people who've left the oncology review staff are some of the more senior reviewers, both the leadership within that group as well as very experienced reviewers. That is going to have an impact. And that impact's going to, I think, start to play out in a more tangible way probably this year, because a lot of the applications that came in-house in 2025, because you had a depleted review staff that were walking out the door, probably those applications weren't as buttoned up. You know, the staff didn't have as much capacity to engage with sponsors, and now they're going to be faced with applications. Maybe the applications aren't reviewable. Maybe it doesn't have all the components that's going to lead to a successful review. And so my fear is you're going to see more CRLs this year.
Just for anybody following along, maybe at home, who's not as familiar with what a CRL is, it's the letter that comes that says, we're not going to be in a position to authorize this at this point. You're not meeting what we think are proper.
Yeah, a complete response letter that they don't think it's a reviewable application. And I think, last year in 2024, they approved about 20 drugs through accelerated approval, which is a process designed to try to accelerate drugs to market based on evidence that they can benefit a patient through a measurement of some kind of intermediate endpoint. So you think of like high cholesterol, a statin can lower cholesterol rather than demonstrating that it improves outcomes in heart disease. That's a surrogate endpoint. So it's a way to get drugs targeted to unmet medical needs on the market more quickly. Last year they approved 9 through that pathway. And so that's a pretty big drop off just in a year. And I think that you're seeing the effects of sort of the loss of experienced review staff play out in these circumstances.